Hi everyone and welcome to our Drought Australia Next Gen March webinar. Following the success of our first webinar, we are excited to announce we will aim to have a monthly webinar series. Tonight's webinar guest is Tony Newman, the CEO of FeedPro Australia. We are very grateful to have Tony on board tonight to discuss all things cattle nutrition. I'll hand over to Tony now to start.
Thanks so much, Michaela, and welcome everyone tonight to this presentation on show and sale cattle feeding preparation. It's a little bit different for me. This is the first Zoom one I've ever presented, so I'm used to looking at people and getting people's questions straight through. So I've tried to cover as much of the many areas of nutrition that relate to show and sale cattle as possible without boring you to death with PowerPoint. And obviously there's a fair few slides to go through, and obviously people slip their questions through as we go, but I'll try and look at them as we go, but probably hold off to the end and we can accumulate them and go from there. So, hang on, sorry, here we go. Normally I get to see people's reactions to this, but for a quick 30 seconds, have a look at the shape and the color and see if anything relates, if you relate to any one of these particular ones. And it's really about a personality quiz, and obviously I can't see you and what if you put your hands up to which one, but I'll talk through what they mean. People that relate to the grey square are very, very much regimented. They're black and white, yes and no type of people. They want an answer, and it's got to be correct in every way. There's no ifs or buts about it. Probably the most prominent person that relates to a grey square is Donald Trump, because I'm right, always right, and we'll always be right. The blue rectangle, you're very much people that are similar to the previous group, but you actually have a little bit of latitude in life, and you understand that sometimes things don't go quite to plan, so you can accept that you get a result, but it might come through a different way. So you're the type of people that go out and get things done, and just keep plodding along, and you'll get to the end with the result. The green hexagonal, green is good, green is go. Hexagonal means you look at things from so many different angles, and you just want to keep trying. If someone says no, you can't do it, you look at it a different way. I'm a green hexagonal because every time I look at things or ask what can I do, you look for another reason. Why can't you do it this way? Now, traditionally, in a group like this, there would be probably half the people that are too embarrassed to put their hand up to say that they relate to a red circle. Now, whether or not that is because they don't want to embarrass themselves about identifying what they relate to, or they're just too lazy. But basically, if you're red circle people, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, red means stop. So that means you've stopped listening already. The circle relates to basically anything that comes in a circle apparatus, so mainly beers or glasses. So you prefer to be sitting around with a circle of mates having a drink rather than listening to me. And most likely you probably won't remember anything after tonight, but all good. I hope that you're not that, and no one drops out during this presentation. It's broken into 4 sections, this presentation, just to try and lay some basics of where we want to start and where we get to the feeding regime. So obviously we're in the breeding game, and the factors that contribute to our performance of our animal are fourfold. You actually have the animal's genetic potential. There is the influence of health and stress management throughout that time. Obviously, the husbandry of how you handle those cattle through their lifetime will impact on their performance. And obviously, what we're talking about today or this evening is nutrition throughout the lifetime. So there's 4 factors there about getting the animal to perform at its best. If we look at successful feeding of cattle, there's probably 3 principles to look at, and they're pretty simple. First one is maintain or keep a healthy rumen. Second one is to optimize the feed intake through that rumen. And the third one is to supply that balanced ration through the rumen. So we're looking at those 3 criteria, and they mean a couple of things. So for everyone that's involved with cattle, we know that we have a ruminant animal, which basically means it has 4 stomachs, but it doesn't start off like that. It obviously starts when they're born as a calf. They're more a single stomach animal for the first period. And as they age very quickly, the rumen starts to develop fully. And it's one of those things, I'll just try and keep the voice up a bit higher, in relation to as the animal gets there around that 3 months of age, you'll find that the rumen is fully developed. So we have an animal then that can fully utilize roughage sources, which is basically what the rumen is designed for. Within that rumen, and once obviously fully developed, the key thing that we have is looking at the microbes that exist in the rumen, and they are billions of them, of hundreds of different types. And what they're there for is to help break down all the different feed components that an animal will come across. Oops, sorry. These microbes have a very short life cycle, so there has to be that constant feeding so that you keep the status quo inside the rumen. And if you do have a major feed change, whether it's going from grass to grain, grain to grass, or from dry feed to green feed, the population takes the time. There's a lag period to adjust to what that new change is. And that obviously we see that in the impact on the animal, and we see that coming through the other end. So we talk about the different microbes in the gut and what we're trying to understand, depending on the feeding program we do, knowing what microbes are most important for us to look at. Here we are, we've got what we call our forage fiber digesting microbes, and they can take 3 to 4 weeks to build their numbers up and adapt to a situation. The starch and sugars, or the ones that we use for talking about feeding grain, they take 4 to 7 days. So when we say to people, feedlot cattle or starting cattle off on grain, we say, you need to take it slowly for the first 10 to 14 days at reduced levels and build it up. That's so that you build the level of concentrate up in line with as the microbes start to adjust, and they become the ones that are the starch and sugar digesting ones. They become the predominant species in the rumen to break down those feeds. Probably the best example with the forage fibers, where you see them take 3 to 4 weeks. The old adages where you buy your sale bull, he's been on feed for a long time, leaves the sale, comes home in completely new environment, and different grass, or no grain or whatever, and they tend to go through a little bit of an adjustment period. And it's no fault of the bull; it's purely the microbes in the gut are taking the time to build back up to know what they're going to be consuming in front of them. Obviously, if you have too much of a good thing or irregular feeding regimes, not only is it bad for humans, but it's also not good for the microbes in the rumen. And that's the critical thing about getting the best performance, is having constant supply of the same feed product at regular periods. One photo didn't upload, but that's not too bad, because it's probably the worst photo. But at the end of the day, how do we know what's going on in the rumen? We have to look at what comes out the other end. So they consume the feed one end, manure comes out the other end. The top left-hand corner, it shows that we've got too much fiber in the diet, and that's purely showing by how it's piling up and it's clumpy. It's a slower rate of passage through the rumen. The second one on the top right, you can see I hope you can see the bit of shiny mucus through the feces. So that's not a good thing. It's showing that the rate of passage is probably too quick, and there's issues inside the rumen with what feed it's consuming, and so it speeds through and creates a little bit of havoc inside. So, as I said, the one that you can't see that didn't come up, it's showing another side of acidosis. So when they're really sick from grain, it's a real spewy, greyish colour. Smells bubbly, all those things, that just something's not right in the animal. And the words of Goldilocks, the bottom right hand corner is just right. To a lot of cattle producers, they believe that this probably is still a little bit too soft for manure for an animal. But if you look at your cows or look at your animals in the paddock when we've got green grass and it's matured, so when your buffalo's probably 6 to 8 weeks after rain, and the cows are really doing, the animals really doing, you see the manures, and they are that softer, greeny brown color, very, very well laid out like this. And then I don't know if my little mouse can be showing there, but there's a little hollow there, so it's like the ideal thing, showing that everything is good in that regard. That's the determining factor. We know that the rumen's functioning and handling the feed that's in front of it. So we've got a healthy rumen. That's great. Everything's going well. How much feed can we get? How much feed can we get through this rumen? This is the biggest challenge. Now, scientists and research people talk about dry matter basis for feed. Unfortunately, we don't feed any of our cattle 100% dry matter feed unless we're in pure drought. So it's basically understanding that whatever feed substances we've got, whether it's grain, hay, pasture, understanding what moisture content may be there and converting it back to 100% dry matter. But at the end of the day, the key component is, people, that the higher the intake per day, the more nutrients we get for growth, reproduction, lactation, or conditioning. Obviously, maintenance is a requirement every day of the week. We have to eat. They have to eat so much, just like ourselves, to stay alive. And then if we can get more into the animal at the right amounts, we will get production through that animal. So indicative intake levels, or dry matter intake levels. Now it comes back to what kind of phase of production the animal's in, and whether they're in a pastoral situation or in a feeding situation. So obviously the first two are our breeders, and trying to get them all to maximize their body weight, so that obviously the more we get down, the better we can get a result. So with the cows, lactating cows, if we can get them to eat 1.7 to 2% of body weight, obviously that means we're going to get more milk. You look at your sires that you're going to put back out in the paddock to join, you need them on a rising plane of nutrition. And in relation to, it's very hard for us to go out and watch them eat grass and that, but you soon know by body condition and things like that, that if the animals are improving. So sorry. The two that we probably got to talk about most are the growing bulls and the sale show bull preparation. We're looking at 2.2 to 2.3 to 2.5% of the body weight in dry matter. So we're looking at 2.5 to maybe 2.7% as fed amount of feed per head per day to get maximum performance out of those animals. So that's a brief outline on the feed intake. Of course, the final thing is to get that feed intake right, it's got to be a balanced ration. So what do we look for in a balanced ration? And once again, I can't see the responses, so I'll just put this up. What do we consider the most important aspect nutritionally for feeding cattle? Now, to be honest, all three of them are very important in their own separate causes. Most of the time, people believe that protein is the most important, but to most of us that have been doing this for a little while, we actually place a lot more emphasis on energy. So we need the energy in the diet to help produce the fuel to do the job. So that energy can come from fiber, can come from your grains, starches, sugars, in that regard. So and then becomes the protein, and those protein obviously provides enough for the building blocks of what we're trying to do, whether it's growth, reproduction, lactation, and the minerals. They're the fine-tuning little things. They're just balancing all the things up of what we need to make sure that we've got this animal or this machine pumping along, and then it's just getting the key things to make sure we are hitting everything right. Sorry about that. There was one slide missing, sorry, I just realised. But in relation to the minerals, as I said, they are the minor components, but they're key in what we do. And we talk about macro minerals, and I've just used their chemical names here, sorry. So calcium, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, sulfur, sodium, and chloride all sound very important, can be very easily put into products, feed rations through products such as calcium, limestone, DCP, kynophos, salt, sulfur powder, magnesium oxide. So we'll talk a little bit about that down the track. The trace elements, so the real micro minerals, copper, cobalt, iron, magnesium, selenium, and zinc. Very essential, but very easy to supply as well, whether it be through your standard vitamin premixes in your feeds, or if you have a real challenge and you've got animals that have probably been doing it a bit tough prior to going on to a sale or show preparation. There's injectable products around called like Marksmin and Multimin, who supply those trace elements at a very high rate very quickly, and you can get your animal right back up to top level for one injection, and then maintain through your feed. Vitamins A, D, and E, and B12, once again, can be included in vitamin mineral packages, but once again, I've found over the years that probably an injection option is the quickest and most cost-effective way, and also it is giving those animals that quick hit, getting them straight back up to the top level, so the body levels are right, the body reserves are there. Okay. There's so many different nutritional parameters when you're looking at different feeds and things like that, guys. So I've just put a simple outline of a range of ideas and that. So obviously the last 2 or 3 years, the drought has learned us or re-educated us in understanding the requirements for young weaners, so under 100 kilos, 100 to 200 kilos, and then our traditional weaner, our yearling animal, developing bull, and then feedlot animals, just to give you some comparisons. So you can see as you go from left to right, your protein levels start off very high with the youngest animal, right through then to your feedlot finisher, where you're dropping down to 11s to 12s as in the ration. Your non-protein nitrogen, that's the sources of protein that come from urea and Gran Am as a guide. So understanding that young animals can't handle it. As they develop, you can start to bring some urea or Gran Am in as a protein source to for those animals. The energy is the key one once again. Getting the right amount of energy to get performance and production where you require it. So as you see with that young early weaner, it needs a high energy, high protein feed. If you come to the other end where we've got a feedlot animal that's in the finishing phase, we have a lower protein but still have a 12 megajoule, greater than 12 megajoules energy component, because what we're trying to do is get weight on, but also then put enough fat on to get the condition. I've just put the monensin in there as a indicator as well for different things we have to consider for different classes of animals. Once again, young animals needing a high rate. Why? Because they're eating less of total feed, but also in that scenario, we're also utilizing it to help minimize health risk, primarily through coccidiosis. So we have a higher level there for that. So there's so many criteria like calcium and phosphorus ratios, fiber content, your vitamins and minerals throughout. So if I did a slide, it'd be like five sheets long with all the things we go through. But this is the starting point of where we want to look at as a guide. Got a basic. I'm lucky no one's put any questions up yet, so we'll get into feed ingredients. And once again, we're far and wide across this great country, so there's always some different feeding options available, or feed ingredients available for mixing feed or making feed to supply your sale and show cattle. But we'll go through some of the major categories and components of what we look at in putting in feeds to make a successful feed program. I've broken it down into 6 categories, guys. The first one is probably, once again, emphasising I'm looking for energy. Why? Because I need the fuel to get production up. And also we are in a situation where with these animals, we are trying to put some condition on them. So energy is key. We then look at protein to balance what's there. And once again, if we've got younger animals, we do need to be specific about what protein levels we need and what protein supply we need to get that. The fiber source is probably one of the most critical ones in this whole operation, apart from water, and I'll touch on that later, because the fiber can account for about 60 to 70% of the animal's daily intake. So that is key in what we look at our fiber sources. Touch again on micro mineral sources, the liquid sources, and then some of the real micro stuff, trace elements, extra trace elements, modifiers, and then medications. So energy source. Where we look for, what are we looking for to provide? What are we looking for to provide energy in our feed rations to feed our sale and show cattle? Obviously, grain is the most common energy source used, and within that, there's many ways that grains can be processed to provide this energy, from whether it's dry or wet rolling to hammer milling, pelletizing, steam flaking, microwave, and extrusion. Obviously, the more intense the processing as we go up along that line, there's also a cost associated with that processing, but also a better utilization for the animal in that regard. The most common grains, everyone asks, what's the best grain to feed to my cattle? Well, at the end of the day, it's probably what's the most cost-effective grain to feed to my cattle, because it could be in central Queensland, and if we don't have winter crops in central Queensland, barley can become a very dear ingredient when sorghum's sitting on your doorstep. So, but in the overall context, barley is a great grain, maize/corn, depending how you want to pronounce it. Wheat, people get worried about wheat, but wheat is a good product to use in moderation with certain programs, depending on what else we're doing. Sorghum, your pulses, so mung beans, chickpeas, if you can be lucky enough to get onto whether it's gratings or the straight grains, the straight beans. And one that used to be very popular, is probably not as available as much as it was probably 20 years ago or 30 years ago when I started, is oats, whole oats. It was a great grain to feed with bull feeding programs. grain alone is not the only energy source. We do get energy from other ingredients, which we'll talk about in other categories, but such as molasses, veggie oil, full-fat soybeans, a great one, and even your good quality hays and silages. They have got energy components in them. So, we're looking at what does the grain bring to the table, and then mixing in a few other key components. Little pick, just looking at different ideas. Top left-hand corner, obviously there's steam flake barley. Love steam flake barley. It's you're getting 95% utilisation out of that grain. Cattle love it. There is obviously a processing cost and a handling challenge with barley, steam flake barley, especially in Queensland with humidity and temperature, but a great ingredient to use. Cracked corn, very much a popular ingredient in bull feeding. Pitch of whole sorghum, but we process sorghum so many different ways, from whether it's a coarse roll, hammer milling it to make it into a pellet. There's people with show cattle that like to boil their grain, whether it's corn or sorghum, and that obviously you're cooking all the starch in those grains to provide a safer way of feeding high levels of grain to the animals. The middle photo is hammer milled wheat. Excuse me. But where hammer milled wheat or byproducts of wheat like mill run, bran and pollard become very good in this far right hand photo of the pellets. 25 years ago, I think it was 26 years ago, I suggested when I was working for Ridley about making a pelletized bull feed to take advantage of mill run, the advantages of mill run and that. And I got laughed at because no one thought that we should feed chook pellets to bulls. But you look today, virtually every feed mill that's got a pellet press will make you a bull feed now, and it is a good option, a good option to provide for feeding cattle. Grains, all grains have different qualities and different wants and needs for how we want to place it in a feed. So you look at, people think that when I'm buying grain off growers, they want to sell me the highest protein grain. I'm actually chasing the energy side of it. So, but as a guide, we're looking here, barley, leaven, in the ranges here show that between the quality, what changes in the quality of grain in protein. This here is just a little bit of a comparison. If you fed the grains whole, compared to processing as a rolled or hammer milled option. Obviously, if you process it, more energy becomes available to the animal. So that is the benefit of processing grains to be included in feed. So we can increase what's available to them in performance. Moving on to protein. Protein can be classified two ways: natural protein or crude protein, or equivalent crude protein, which is synthetic, and that's your urea and Gran Am. Now, we won't talk too much about the urea and Gran Am because within a diet, there's no more than probably 0.8 to 1% inclusion of those at the highest level. Where your natural protein or crude protein, we're looking at all vegetable protein meals. We can't use meat meal anymore because it's banned. So we're looking at the vegetable protein meals, and in relation to which one's the most popular. Soybean meal, one of the highest at 48% protein. Very good. Full fat soybean is lower in protein, but has more energy in it, so the oil's still in there. So it's a great one for including in show cattle rations. Obviously, if it's good and it gives us a benefit, unfortunately, it's a lot dearer than soybean meal, but everything in moderation. Canola meal is becoming more and more used due to the seasons. Palm kernel and copper meal have been imported meals, and lots of that available. So we've tend to start to use them a lot more in our rations. Cottonseed meal, not as much because the close of a processing plant a couple of years ago. And one that's probably starting to become more used in feeds and even by itself is dried distillers grain. So you can get maize, wheat. Can't get sorghum anymore. Dolby's shut down, but the wheat DDG from the south, maize DDG was coming from America. Once again, in protein sources, those pulse crops, they are a bonus when you're looking at feeding for sale cattle and show cattle. Chickpeas, mung beans, lupin. If you're in the south, field peas really become a good option. That you put them in at 10-15% in your ration, and you're providing protein plus a bit of energy in a safe form. Here's some lovely pics. top one left hand here is maize distiller's grain. It comes from America. So all those whiskey and bourbon drinkers, thank you very much. It's the byproduct of that process, and it's been coming to Australia for the last 2 years. Mung beans, as I said, very good process, very good option for protein. Top right, the orangey colour is cottonseed meal. We don't see as much of that anymore. Bottom right is the full-fat soybean meal. It's a real golden sweet, adds a real nice smell to feed, and it's very, very palatable. Every animal, we use it across a fair different classes of animal, and animals just love that full-fat soybean meal. In the middle of the pellets, they're wheat DDG pellets. So once again, high protein, a little bit of energy, easy to handle as a pellet. And then we've got our palm kernel meal that comes from overseas. So very, very dry, very bland, very lower protein, but also a lower price per tonne. Mentioned earlier about the fibre, and it is the key critical component in any feeding program we have for our sale and show cattle, and even our livestock in the paddocks. But more essentially, especially if we're bringing fibre into the equation, because it is two-thirds of our daily feed requirements. So you're looking here, it needs to have some decent protein, it has and good energy levels, but the key component of fibre, we want to know the digestibility of it and the fiber content of it. So they're two opposites. Digestibility means the more that we consume, the more they get out of it, but the fiber content, we need to have a bit there so we actually can help the rumination process and the chewing of the cud process. So we've got good fiber content. They chew their cud, they process their feed, they get the rate of passage right, and you get the most out of what you're feeding. And obviously with fiber, there's so many options, in hay, pasture, crop or legume options. In straw, crop residues like wheat and barley are two very good straw options. Silage, bulk silage, we can make it silage out of pasture, make it out of crop, make it out of legumes. I mentioned haylage because it's basically from a round bale point of view, it's at a different dry matter to your silages. So it still comes from the same pasture, crop or legume, but it's at a different dry matter level. So knowing that determines what the intakes are going to be like. And then you get byproducts from other industries, like in the almond hulls, mill almond hulls that come from Victoria and South Australia, peanut shell out of Queensland, fibre pellets, and that could be oat hull pellets or could be soybean hull pellets. And the soybean hull pellets this year, the last 2 years, have been coming out of Argentina because there've been none available within Australia. So we look at a couple of pictures of a couple of different styles of fibre options. Top left-hand corner with the silage, that's a good forage silage, so 35% dry matter. So obviously we're using a total mixed ration. We understand we've got to add dry matter to that. Bottom left-hand corner is a forage hay, a barley, I think it was barley hay type thing. Very, very, very good hay. The cattle do not leave a scrap of it behind. You're paying more per tonne for quality, but then you're getting a full utilisation of the hay, whether it's been fed by itself or fed in a mix. The middle one, the nice, lovely green rye and oats, that got made into hay, which was high quality, probably a little bit too high quality in its prime state for cattle because there's just no fibre. It's highly digestible, so rate of passage improves quickly. So you'd use that in combination with, say, straw that's in the bottom right-hand corner. And one of the most popular questions about feeding sale cattle and show cattle is about lucerne. And obviously, is lucerne too rich? Is it too high in protein or too high in this? But once again, lucerne, that's probably a little bit on the mature side, shedded. It makes a very good feed for especially show cattle because it's quality and they love to eat it and it keeps them full. So just a few quick examples of once again specs we're looking at with hays and silages. Looking at a grassy hay being roughly 8 to 10% protein, that could be as high as 20%. If you're taking very good quality hay before it seeds, you can get high quality, and obviously if it's irrigated and fertilized, it'll be a higher level, and that also will impact then on improving energy as well if it's a well looked after crop. Your oat and hays, once they start to the milky stage, their head starting to set, it decreases the quality a little bit, increases the quantity a bit. So it's a fine trade-off between quality and quantity and what you want to get out of your hay. The example of lucerne, your prime lucens versus your shed, or your little bit later, it's flowered. Quality wise, back a bit on protein, back a bit on energy, but once again, it's about what that does for the total diet of the animal. And then, like, if we have to really dry up a total mixed ration with silage, or we want to bind the cattle up a bit, utilizing a small percentage of straw where it's low in protein, low in energy, extremely high in fiber, and low in digestibility, so we get them to really chew their cud. It's that fine balancing act. No questions, that's all good. Back on those macro and micro minerals I mentioned earlier. Once again, if you look at a traditional feed, a show feed or a sale feed that you're hand feeding, it's going to be somewhere around 60% grain, 25% could be protein meals and buffers. 25% be protein meals. Your buffers and fiber sources could be another 15%. That leaves you about 10% left, of which in that we're having all these secret herbs and spices. So the things like limestone, you might get between 1% and 2% inclusion of limestone. If we're looking at younger animals in this type of feeding program, we may put some extra phosphorus source in, whether it's from DCP or Kynophos. Same with adding a smidgen of sulfur. Salt, we're talking maybe 1% salt, 0.8% salt. Like all these inclusion levels of these macro minerals are 1% or less in the feeds. You then slip into your micro minerals, so that what you supply through your vitamin mineral premix, you're looking at somewhere between 3 and 5 kilos per ton of vitamin mineral premix. The unfortunate part is vitamin mineral premixes can range from $3.50 a kilo to $10 a kilo, depending on the quality of what you're putting in. So even at 3 kilos, at $3.50, that's $10 a ton. At $10 a kilo, it's $30 a ton. So very quickly contributes, but we're looking at key specific supply of nutrients. As I mentioned earlier, the A, D, and E, you're probably better off looking at it, covering that requirements off with an injection rather than in the premix, but it can be done. Board at work last year, we did little pretty pickies. So obviously showing these are some of the micro ingredients. So the yellow one is the sulfur. The red one there is zeolite, which is a rumen buffer. Protein meal, monensin, that's the vitamins and minerals. The reddish ones are rumensin. Then you got your salt, granam, and urea. So they're all minor components within a mix. Mixing feeds, you want to make it that is palatable, sweet to the cattle. They want to eat it, and that means like minimizing dust or trying to combine all the ingredients together. So obviously we traditionally try and use a liquid source in that mix. So whether it's either molasses or molasses-based supplement or vegetable oil. The key benefit of using both these style of products is you're actually adding energy to the ration at the same time. Molasses as fed basis has got as much energy as grain nearly, and depending on the feed makeup, anywhere between 2, 6. If it's a supplement, you might even be at 8% inclusion level to mix in a total mixed ration. Your vegetable oil, very high in energy, so you only want to put small amounts in. The unfortunate thing with veg oil in the last 12 to 18 months is the price has gone through the roof, and the reason for that is it's all relates to two things. It started off being the bushfires, and then it became COVID. Because obviously with lockdown and bushfires initially with no tourists in the south, and then lockdown, no one was going out to eat at restaurants or fast foods or whatever, so there was less cooking, so there was less used cooking oil. So when you get told by your suppliers that because of COVID your price of this veg oil goes up $300 a ton, you think that they're pulling your leg, but it's supply and demand. We got a question. Very good question, Anonymous. I'll put that one in at the end. We can combine it with a few others. Example of adding molasses or liquid supplements or veg oils to a total mixed ration. Once again, balancing up what's required in that total mix. The final category in the feed ingredients, when you look at what rations you're trying to produce, is understanding is there any specific challenges with the livestock that you're feeding, or any key aspects you want to ensure that you cover to the highest degree. So when you look at additional trace elements, that might be additional minerals and vitamins, you can look at adding them into the mix. like the person who asked the question, you can provide them, if you're doing in a group feeding situation in a paddock, you could provide an ad lib in a supplement out in the paddock and let the cattle take that. But probably when you're doing total mixed rations and that, you add it through the feed. So we're trying to ensure that they all get it. One example, zinc. There's a lot of very good evidence and proof in relation to additional zinc levels will improve fertility aspects, whether it's male or female, and probably one of the key ones we found in working with dairies, and that it gives a lot more hoof strength and hoof health to the animals. So continually walking on, or in wet conditions. So they're things that we can consider. Probably common across most feeds, there will be a modifier or an ionophore in your mix. And basically looking at a rumen microbe, we're trying to enhance particular species of microbes to help fine-tune what's going on with what's being fed. So we have, such as Monensin, Lalsoid, and Flavo, so their trade names being Rumensin, Bovatec, and Flavoco 5. So they're all classified as ionophores or modifiers, and they're there to manipulate what's going on. Now, once again, inclusion levels of those in your feed, we're only looking at a couple of 100 grams per tonne to be in there. The last one's medications, and it's they are used, but probably not as much as they were 20 years ago. And probably the main one is Virginia mycin or escalin. It's a scripted, so you need a vet script to have this included in your feeds, and it's basically about reducing the risk of acidosis. Now, that's when you're feeding high grain level, primarily when you're feeding a high grain, low fiber style feed, or you're trying to do accelerated grain starch levels to punch cattle along. Today, most companies or most feeding programs, because we're probably going at lower rates than we used to do 10, 20 years ago, not as much call for it, but still available, still used in some specific situations. Thanks, Kurt. That's a good question. So, sale cattle feeding programs. We've got a feed, and we've got, once again, I haven't given you any silver bullets on what is the best exact feed, but it's about getting what's available to you and what the balance of these ingredients. In determining for feeding cattle for sale, we'll go through, I've got two examples here of a heifers and some bulls that are basically coming for sale within the next week or two. And thank you to the people who provided allowed me to use the photos, and also provided some information on their history of the cattle. And get two different examples. We'll go with heifers and we'll go with some bulls. So I'll rock and roll into that. Obviously, we've got two distinct markets for sale preparation. Your sale of your stud or herd animals via the auction ring or stud sale, or your sales of paddock sales or paddock sales of commercial herd bulls in the paddock. Both critical, but I suppose the one we'll focus more on is the stud sale animal, because it's the inverted commas, we're looking to sell the best of the best to get the most money, inverted commas. Obviously, we're trying to sell size for breeding purposes and improvement of genetic improvement. So obviously within the Droughtmaster breed, we have the Droughtmaster National, we've got the Roma sale, and we've got many other multi-vendor and private stud sales throughout the year. Females are sold annually, obviously one of the major focuses being the National Annual Female Sale at Gympie in the next week from a Droughtmaster point of view. Both have similar basis for preparation, but with different levels of what we're looking for in performance, obviously, and also depending on the stage of their production cycle. When you're planning your sale preparation, it's not just the 3, 4, 5, 6 months prior to the sale. It's rather probably process that should be starting at weaning or the latest early yielding stage, depending on what you're selling. And obviously, everyone has their own beliefs, wants, and needs on how they want to present their animals and how they want to buy animals. So that it's a fine line of what you want, what you need. And so, looking at what sale is your main selling option, looking at what age your animals are going to be at that sale, whether they're going to be 21 months of age or 29 months of age, what's that market that you're selling into, what's the demand from the people that attend that sale. If it's females, need to know what production phase they're in. Like obviously young heifers are fine, but if you're presenting a cow and calf, or a cow or heifer or cow heavily in calf, knowing where we're going to put her, how much condition we're going to have on her to present her at sale and have no impacts. And obviously the key one is that, as I say, the age. So what body weight and what condition do you want? What's your goals for that sale? And then you start working backwards. And, as I say, I normally work with my customers. We start looking at weaning weights and go forward from there, and then look at where are the gaps in the process. Obviously, feeding cattle, there are many options. For those that are feeding significant numbers and have the ability to have their own ability to mix their own feeds, and can utilize roughage style mixes, you do a total mix ration. It's the complete world. So whether it's silage and hay, silage, hay and concentrate, or hay and concentrate with other additives, so that's all the animals eat per day is that product. Or you can make a partial mixed ration that is then also has access, the cattle have access to paddock feed or paddock roughage. Self-feeders are very popular because obviously you can have a feed that's either a total mixed ration once again, or have a high concentrate where you have the slide set and use the physical restriction to try and get intakes to a desired level, and having roughage available ad lib 24/7. Probably the most precise one, but also the most intense one that people do is hand feeding. So we're looking at daily allocation with roughage paddock hand available in to the animals. All of those, it's when you sit down and say, well, we just talk about intake and say, how do I know what they're going to eat? Self-feeders is probably the hardest one, because you put so much in the self-feeder and you really don't get a true guide until the feeder's empty again to see what the animals are eating. Hand feeding, you've got total control. Total mixed rations, how much concentrate you're putting in and then how much they're eating of that feed per day, so you can manipulate what's going on. Couple of examples just of feeds again. Top left-hand corner was silage feeding. Self-feeders, that picture there, sorry for the white feet people, but that feed there, probably the slides are probably set a fraction too high still, because the cattle are bringing feed down back behind themselves. You really want to see that where they're really working for it, so that there's minimal feed. The biggest rule of thumb is when I meet people and I shake their hands, I find out how big their fingers are, so you can work at a finger width to set a self feeder. High grain, medium roughage style in the bottom corner, and the other corner with the bulls on a high silage total mixed ration, being prepared for sale. This, I tossed and turned about putting this, but it's like everything, you need to have a starting point so we can set our goals and that. So argue with the figures, guys. They can manipulate them either way, but just looking at, where do we start at birth weight? Where's our weaning weight? And then from there, that really sets up that animal's progression through to, as a sale animal, where you got to have it and what you've got to do between weaning and sale weight. The question from Kurt in relation to creep feeding. Creep feeding is a great option to give those calves an additional boost, and also reduces the nutritional stress on the cow. You look down the northern rivers of New South Wales from the old veal days, and that there's still people that do a bit of creep feeding. Without mentioning names, but Roger and Jenny Underwood many years ago in the far north in the drought set up their own creep feeding options with more of a protein meal option for the calves, and that became the calf pen. And it was basically just a big square in the middle of the paddock, and the calves slowly learnt they go there, and they got that little bit of extra nutrition. And so it does definitely benefits the calf, because they're so efficient, and everything they consume, they're so much more efficient in converting it. It's just coming down to what works best for you from an access point of view. Yes, it's a cost, but for those people that do it, the cost is outweighed by the extra weight that the calf puts on, and also minimising the body loss of the cow. So I hope that answers your question a little bit, Kurt. So yeah, the weights are there. I think they're realistic weights. When I sit down with my customers, we look at these areas and say, right, where are we in this? So then we can start planning, what have we got to do? So we'll, being the polite people are, we'll go with the ladies first. So we'll look at our females. So 25 to 30 kilos of birth weight. At weaning at 7 months, could be anywhere from 200 to 275. It's very seasonal. Yearling weight is looking at is a period of time when it's normally the driest time of the year, so we don't get much more weight gain for that extra 5 months, but hopefully they've gone forward. And then if you're setting up to sell heifers in that 15, 16 months of age, where do you want to have them in body weight, body condition? So we'll work through the process. So we have, I'm sorry I've taken the names away from these two lovely ladies, but they're heifer A and B to me. And in relation to, you look at these two heifers, and this was in November, late November last year, this photo was taken, so pre going on to a sale preparation, being aimed to go to the Gympie Dratmaster sale. So they're yielding heifers, and they're looking, I thought, pretty well for that time of the year and that age. Here's all their history. The only thing is that I adjusted here was for heifer A. She's a month older than heifer B, so I adjusted that her at 1 month when the other heifer B was born, she may have been about 50 kilos. But from here on in, all the weights correlate to they'll be the same treatment process. So like both weaned in July, 310, 290 kilos. That's a good size weaner. The really positive thing looking at this, whoever the people are doing this, they've got their weaning process under control, because those cattle have put on weight in weaning. If you know, in a 2-week period, your cattle have gone forward during weaning, that's a positive. The stress of leaving mum, it's like being kicked out of home. The stress of leaving home and not having your regular food supply being given to you, you know, if you minimize that impact and have an animal going forward, that's a big start, because that sets them up. Because obviously August, September, October in Queensland are our 3 driest months of the year traditionally. So if you get them set up that they've gone forward a bit, then they really hit the reality. They get in the paddocks and they go, oh my gosh. So you look at these animals here, mid-August, going well. Early November, they've been out there for 2.5, just on just under 2.5 months. Weight hasn't changed too much from 2.5 months ago. So you know that they've done it, inverted commas, have done it tough, but they're still in good, still looking well. They've come in to get a little bit, start getting looked at to see what ones are going to get selected for the sale process. So they're being handled, being given a bit of hay, not too much else, I'm led to believe. And you know, within 11 days, there's this weight gain, a miraculous weight gain of 25 to 30 kilos. You go, wow, how good's that? But a lot of that's probably to do with gut function as well. So a little bit of gut fill, but the animal's feeling better. And the thing I love about this table is that it shows that any impacts you do with treating your animals. So these obviously animals are in the west, so they're getting treated for 3-day tick fever prior to coming east to go to the national, be prepared for the national sale. So all of a sudden, in 2 days, they've lost 14 kilos. And it's not muscle loss, it's just gut function loss. So because you see a week later, they've got over their injections, they're back up to where they were or a bit better from the 18th to the 27th. So that's a good thing that they're about to start sale prep. They're yielding animals, 360, 330 kilos at 12 months, roughly 12 months of age. They're going all right. So the key now is to understand what is your preferred, where do you want to present those heifers? And heifers at 15 months, once again, I showed in those tables, you know, somewhere between 400 and 450 would be ideal. And these heifers have ended up in that category. So here they are now in late February, all dolled up, all ready to go. And the key thing, talking to the people about these heifers and that, you know, they're on good green grass where they are. So the grass has provided the bulk of the performance, and these heifers have been getting minimal concentrate, but that probably 2 to 2.5 kilos they're getting a day has been enough to be the cream on top to get them to that next level. So, and these heifers here on a sale prep, if you're looking at, personally, I look at, you know, around 1 kilo a day. Before I saw the figures, I said, if you can do that, you know you're going to have an animal presented fairly well. And you can see there that they've filled their pants, but they haven't stretched their pants. So they're in good condition, good body weight, and at a very good age that, you know, go through the sale and ready to join if they're not already joined in that regard. So once again, just looking at those figures, 450, 436. So in summary, you know, show that the top line is the heifer on the left, and the bottom line is the heifer on the right. So a couple of interesting things. Both heifers are by the same bull. So this actually gives us takes out a bit of genetic variation on performance of the animals. So you look at the birth to weaning weights, and you go, geez, what's influencing that? Well, I found out that the heifer on the top, or the left-hand side, she's come off a younger cow, and the heifer on the bottom has come off a mature cow, which is basically in the range between 11 and 12-year-old. So you've got a mother that's know what it's all about, providing that a bit extra additional milk. From weaning to sale prep, interesting. The heifer, who was actually the top heifer, is actually a month older. She's handled that phase a little bit better, not much better, but handled a little bit better than the second heifer. And then their sale prep, from when they left their property to go to be prepared on grass and a little bit of top up, they're averaging 1 kilo to 1.1. Like, it's nearly the perfect scenario. Before, I got drawn in by these photos when I saw these pictures and thought that's the kind of photos I need for this presentation. And once I got the information, it showed that, you know, these heifers have been prepared nearly spot on, and, you know, kudos to the people involved with that. You then look at whole of life is the one I always look at as just a parameter. And once again, for a young animal, in the heifers, females, you know, 0.85 to 0.9 whole of life is a good result. So, you know, tick box, tick box, tick box. You know, even though they did a little bit tough in the weaning to sale preparation, they still went forward. You know, so that's not a bad result overall. So, in that regard. Holy geez, so I'll hoot along. Once again, we look at the bulls now, and once again, it's a hard one with bulls, and so we're looking just at springtime sales, so anything from August, September, October. So your bull's going to range that 23 to 25 months of age. So we're looking at 725 to 825 as a goal range, depending on what age and what's going on. I'll put this graph up quickly, and this probably needs to be updated a little bit, but it just shows to show if your bulls have a setback from that weaning period through to pre-sale prep, then you've got to play catch-up football. And if you look, we're going along, and then the last 100-something days, you know, to get to 800 kilos, I need to put on 2.2 kilos a day. And in the words of a drought master breeder the other day, he said, we don't all own buffalo country and have feedlots to do that. So the importance of probably maintaining the growth of your animals through that key post-weaning to yearling stage is more critical. And unfortunately, it is the drier part of the year, so supplementation of some shape or form is required. But, you know, that can be as simple as a protein meal-based supplement, or if you've got roughage, in giving some, you know, a good dry liquid or a liquid supplement to help them get better utilization out of that feed. The comment down the bottom is, no, it's not there. I don't think you can see it. This red line, if you're preparing these cattle that on the red line theory, they actually will lay down more fat than those that are on the blue line. And the reason for that is that you've had this stress period here, and when nutrition becomes available, yes, you get growth, but it's not all muscle. It will be additional fat, and that's been work done through some research by CSIRO. Quickly to these two bulls, they're going to show you. Now these two bulls, it's interesting how they track from when they were born to sale presentation. They've just skimmed along, and a few areas where they've tickled, and a few areas where they've kicked along. So just quickly, these two bulls, later style maturing bulls, a little bit older bulls, going to a market that is looking for real growth and grunt. So you look at these bulls have come off the mum, 1 to 0.9. Sale prep, same thing. They've ticked along. This customer here that runs bulls in big paddocks with access to grain and self feeders. By running them in big paddocks, they probably sacrifice 0.2 to 0.5 of a kilo per day in exercise, rather than putting the weight on. But they do that in a safe way where these cattle have access for a little bit longer time. Whole of life, a little bit lower, but they're an older bull, and, you know, presenting these bulls are still going to present well at the sale as bulls that are functionable and fit to go out in the paddock straight away in that regard. General guide, once again, it's horses are courses, and when talking to people, these are kind of the inverted commas, the dream list of numbers we look at as a starting point. Nutrition can impact some of them. It can influence some of them. Obviously, the weight, where you get them through nutrition. Your scans, obviously, by how well they're growing, and then how much energy we provide to lay the fat down. And eye muscle is definitely influenced by nutrition at key times of the growing animal, and it is really that post weaning through to sale prep time, that's where things like muscle development are key. Just as an interesting note, I had my lovely office lady run through the Droughtmaster sale for the all breeds and just have a look at what the sale bulls figures were. They averaged 800 kilos. They're 2.5 teeth, so a little bit over 2-year-old, 12 and 9, and an eye muscle of 130. So it's in the realms of achievability, people, of where we're looking at. Just quickly in the graph, and all is trying to show you their nutrition. They're using nutrients for maintenance, so that the heavier they get, the more nutrients you need for maintenance. And then if you want to put more weight on, we need more nutrients. To do that, we need more body feed intake. So if we're doing 1.1 at 400 kilos, we need 2% body weight of a 11 meg, 12% protein. If I want 1.7 kilos, I've got to get them to eat 2.5% of the body weight. So that's the idea of feed intakes versus quality of nutrition to give a response. So obviously, the more we can stay below 1.7, say in the 1.5 to 1.1 range, then we can manage it a lot easier for feed intakes. Always a topical one, and this photo will come up twice. So fat coverage and show and sale bulls. Obviously, when you're trying to understand where your fat coverages are, we don't get our exact understanding until we scan them either just before the sale or a week or two out. But there obviously are indicators that you can look at to see how your animal is performing and where they are in stage of production. And obviously, the tail head is one of the last layers, one of the last spots that they lay fat over the top end. And so once you start to see the little bubbles start to appear on the top of your bull, you know that we're starting to get a little bit of coverage across the board. Obviously, up to the age of 2, you'll see that change a bit because the cattle will go through growth phases. And if you ever take multiple photos of cattle in the same spot and watch their frame develop and the fat coverage changes, and it only really probably becomes more consistent once you've got past that 2-year, 24 to 26 month age period when you that they've gone through their major growth phases. I put this up purely just to feedback on where people's fear and phobia about fat condition or feeding bulls with sperm quality and scrotal circumference. Now, this is from over in Canada, where they fed bulls for nearly, just under 6 months from 9 months of age. So, they've taken this young animal and they've put the pressure on them to see how they handle it. Now, if they're out, they call it a green forage, so it's all roughage. You get the performance, the high energy. It's 80% grain, 20% forage. No one in their right mind, and I say right mind, would feed bulls an 80% grain, 20% forage if they wanted to use them or get them to be viable down the track. As I indicated before, we're looking at grain inclusions or concentrate inclusions of maybe 25 to 35% and 65 to 75% forage or roughage. Well, so we're over this side here. So, when people say about, this and that, and it's going to impact on sperm quality, yes, the more you feed, the more fat that will impact. But once again, we're doing things in moderation. So, we're not this style of feeding program. We don't feed 80% grain. That's a feedlot ration. People want to feed feedlot rations, then they're going to feed those bulls to kill them, not to breed them. So that's just an example for you guys on that. Quickly, show cattle. Beef always brings everyone out of the woodwork to feed all their cattle for showing and that. And it's obviously the best chance to showcase your stud's array of genetics. And once again, I suppose put a benchmark up about where you think you are or where you want to be versus everyone else that's involved in the industry. And once again, whether it's the Small Country Show or Beef 2021, there's still the same criteria involved with identifying these animals at a young age for potential showing, because it's critical to the point of the controlled feeding and growth for these animals, because eventually they're going to come back to a paddock environment. So we need to grow them, get them to express their genetic potential, look their glamorous and their best most days, but knowing that once their career's over, they've got to go back to work. It's a bit like the old footballers when they get retired, they've got to go back to hard work and get into it. So it's not all pancakes and beers. So this importance of performance and longevity basically means that the main way of feeding these cattle is through hand feeding, and ad lib roughage. So once again, coming back down to the guidelines, And because your feed concentrates can vary so much from a high grain only to a grain and fiber to a grain and buffer fiber, your feeding regime on a concentrate can range from 0.75% of body weight up to 1.5% of body weight. The 1.5% of body weight is probably more to do with some of the cattle pallet feeds that are around. They're based on mill run, so they've got a lower energy but a safer energy level, and the protein's there, so they can eat a bit more and handle it. But traditionally, I'm a simple person, so I work on 1% to 1.25% of body weight with a concentrate. And obviously you're splitting that over 2 feeds, preferably early AM, where it's between 6 and 7, and then that mid PM one, maybe between 3 and 4, 4 and 5, no later than that, splitting those feeds, and whilst they have access to roughage. Bull pellets, we've seen that. Roughage, critical, especially show cattle. These animals are on feed for a long time. They do become fussy. So it's critical to get good quality roughage. And that's where the discussion about using things like good lucerne or good forage, or barley forage, or things like that. As long as it's fresh, it's digestible, the cattle want to eat it, it's sweet smelling. The more they eat, the more they fill up, the more they remain full. The biggest challenge of the show is having your animal full. So when you're walking out the ring, they're expressing that they're full through the rumen. Quickly on the heifers. So these three show heifers, they're getting prepared for beef. They average between 13 to 15 months of age, 4 to 450 kilos. As a group, they're getting their bucket, their magical bucket per day, which is about 12, 13 kilos of the concentrate, and have ad lib barley forage on hand. So they're still when the photo was taken on 90 days out. So we'll reassess them probably 40 days out from beef to see how they're going. And if we need to add a little bit of gloss through their coat, we'll look at increasing things like veggie oil and full fat soybean to give that little bit of glisten without putting too much extra push on the animal. Cow and calf. 30 months of age, she's got a strapping calf hanging off her, an in calf. So, and she's more than 550 kilos, hadn't been weighed for a while, but we're actually feeding her 6.5 kilos a day. So obviously more than 1% of body weight. But the reason that is that obviously she's making milk for the calf, and milk is probably one of the most energy demanding products. Well, it isn't, it's a very energy demanding product. So we're giving it extra energy so that she can keep making the milk for the calf and not take body condition off her at the same time. So, once again in 60 days time, we'll see how they're going. The calf's going to be sitting that 7 months age, 8 months age bracket. So thumping calf, really hitting mum up for milk. So we've got to balance her body condition. This boy's a bit shy. He wouldn't let me take a good photo side on, but just to show he's a senior show bull this year, but he was a junior show bull last year. So obviously didn't get around to too many shows, but kept ticking along. And he's 900 plus. Hasn't got that much condition on him yet, because we're basically we're trying to get bulls up with right condition. It's about selecting the period you want to have them Mickey Mouse. So obviously with beef this year, there's a 2-3 week period that we want to have them as best, and then we can let them back down again. So he's on about 8.5 kilos of concentrate with ad lib hay, and handling it quite easily. And he'll probably still do his 1.1 kilos a day for the next 90 days. So hopefully by beef, he's strapping that ton and he carries it very easily. Just back to that graph again, just showing the more weight we need to put on it as they get heavier, then we've got to get more intake into them. So just understanding what we need to do. The last thing I need to talk about, and hopefully those people that can see our young man there understand or know what this is about. You can have all the feed in the world and everything else be right, but if you don't have this right, it's no good, and that is water, H2O. Fresh and clean as possible, critical for every class of animal, but most particularly our lactating females. Making 5 to 8 litres of milk a day requires a lot of extra water for a cow. And that in that point, especially with show cattle, they probably get underestimated how much they need. But intakes can be as high as 60, 70 litres a day for these cows, or bulls that are over 650, 700 kilos. So, once again, trying to get as much water. If you can't get into the water troughs, you're probably presenting water to them 3 times a day, and in hot conditions, maybe 4 times a day. And the unfortunate thing is when we go to shows, cattle can take 2 to 3 days to adjust, and this does impact on their rate of passage. It reduces their feed intake, it hollows them out, they get a little bit loose, but 2 to 3 days, once they get their water level back up to the total maximum, then they start to turn around. And that always probably, unfortunately, is the day after showing. Challenges of feeding show cattle and sale cattle. They're like animals. They are animals, and they also can be individually minded like ourselves. They'll do what they want when they want. So us trying to predict what they're going to do and how they do it, we are good, but we're not God. Animals don't understand the words no more, especially when they're hungry, and don't consider the ramifications they eat too much of something. So if you have ad-lib grain there, or the self-feeder's got a bit of a bow in it, so they're going to sit in one corner, they'll say, beauty, this is like free rum on a Friday night, I'm going to have a bit more. But the ramifications are that it could get bloat, you could get acidosis, or if they're finished growing, start laying down more fat than you want. In saying that, there's no one magical solution for all feeding aspects. It's a case of using your understanding of your cattle and what you know works well best for you, and just manipulating at the right times. Just a couple of finishing points. Questions over the years from people about how I just want a bit more muscle in the back of him and a little bit more fat on the top. Unfortunately, I don't know of a feed that can specifically put muscle and fat in the one location on an animal. Nutrition only amplifies the animal's genetic ability and performance. If you want to get a bit more on your ass end of your animals, I suppose you'd talk to someone like Kim Kardashian and see how she does it. But it's basically if the animal's got the potential to do it, they will do it, and it's better to get them to express it while they're younger than trying to play catch up when they get closer to 2 years of age. One favourite topic of feed and stud producers is who's to blame, or why do you blow the hocks in my cattle? It can be a number of reasons, and I suppose I explain it saying it's basically a pressure release valve. If there's an issue and the pressure's got to give, it's going to give in that hock. Now, couple of reasons. It can be a cause definitely from significant feed consumption, overconsumption, or significant change in feed. So the animal doesn't handle it, and you get issues there. If it's a real issue, you'll see acidosis probably symptoms first. They're really loose in the manures, hot, dry nose, expression called hot-footed, where they look like they're stepping on tippy toes, and you'll see red swelling around your hocks. And then you will see the implication of a blown hock, where a little bubble will pop in around the knee joint area. It is primarily, as I say to people, when it happens, majority of the time will happen when you've got an animal that's growing well and it's probably not 100% structurally correct, and we've put the weight on a frame that might be a little bit light. So it traditionally happens where animals have had a stress period and done nothing, and then we go and whack some extra weight on. So, but it's always a fun discussion with people about how I can blow one hock and not the other, and do it in one bull and not the 20 bulls that are on feed. But that's where it happens, and you'll see those little bubbles. Once it happens, impact on the animal, there's no major issue as such. It's a cosmetic thing then, and animals still continue putting on weight. That we do get conscious of it. The last comment again comes back to this fat and the implications of having too much fat on the animals, and how do we stop them, or how do we control it? But once again, this tail head's the last spot where fat will get laid down before it starts coming down the tail head, and the last areas is either in your scrotal or your udder region. So obviously not ideal for both of them, because obviously if it's on your scrotal, you're going to cover the testes and create issues there with sperm production, or if it goes into the udder, you're going to be replacing fat cells, milk producing cells with fat cells, so you get less chance for milk. I'd love to know who Anonymous is. I'd like to know the question too. It's the question about how to prevent good doing show females from laying down fat in the brisket. Once again, managing that energy, and it's a hard one because it doesn't happen in every female or even bulls. It doesn't happen in every animal. So that animal's ability to convert that feed more and then go into into laying down fat is very much a challenge. And yeah, like it gets hard with show cows, especially whether you're trying to keep the condition on. You will get a little bit heavier through the biscuit because we're trying to keep body condition up. but yeah, if they're laying it down the brisket, that is the other last point. So you've just basically got to back off the amount of concentrate they're getting. And because once they're up there, it's easier to maintain than to keep putting it on in that regard. And are you going to answer the question, Michaela, are you? Nope.
Oh, no, it's how it automatically does it.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this one here, I'll just answer this one question. In relation to minerals, you're better off including them in the pelleted grain or keep stock on a mineral or liquid lick. What is preferred? Preferably if you may not be feeding grain all year round to animals and want to keep animals on trace elements. Very good question, and you've actually answered it within your question. So obviously there's times of the year when the grass is green, the cattle are doing well with no supplementation, but that's probably the key time of the year we do need to keep mineral levels available. And once again, the biggest one is phosphorus, and it will contribute to many things in increasing growth potential in your growing animals. It will help with fertility. It will help with lactation. So whether it's we have customers that use with dry lick or a block or liquid lick in those times of the year, and by doing that, you're just fine tuning it, because there's an expression, Leyberg's law of limiting nutrients. You can have all the quality energy, protein in the world, but if your mineral content, and especially something like phosphorus, is below par, then those animals will only perform to that level. And it could be as simple as supplying an extra 10 grams of phosphorus a day through a dry lick, 100 grams of dry lick, and all of a sudden you'll pick up an extra 50 to 100 grams of growth, or you'll pick up another litre of milk. And that litre of milk on a cow to a calf means probably 200 grams extra growth in that calf. So, during those times of the year when you haven't got them accessing to grain or high concentrates, definitely the supplements. And that's what people get a bit of a phobia. They say, they've got feed access all year round. No, it's not feed. The supplements there just to help balance the animals' rumen and nutritional needs to make use of the feed they've got in front of them. And anything under, say, I classify a supplement under 1 kilo per head per day. So young animals, young growing bulls, we can feed them a protein meal supplement that's 600 grams of protein meals, and then some urea and buffers and things like that. And we get some really good results off green grass, but it's about just maximizing the feed that's in front of you. Any other questions? You there, Michaela?
So if you've got any questions, there's a little Q&A button down the bottom. You can select and type through your questions.
All good.
So you've got another question there, Tony.
Have I? Right, hang on.
Is it worthwhile having a dry lick and a liquid available, or best just to use one?
In relation to it, I suppose it's looking at what you're trying to address. Dry licks or liquid will supply majority of what you're looking to supplement. There are times where, in situations where probably in a partial situation, the only deficiency in liquids, and it's a broad term, liquids, because anything from a dunder base to molasses base may not be able to get as much mineral content in. So particularly on coastal areas or light soil or light country, where we probably do need a bit more calcium, phosphorus. We've actually worked. It's better to supply that ingredients or those key nutrient requirements through a dry lick, because the cattle can go and take it themselves and get the level they want. And then the liquid, which will have energy, protein and that in it, that will stimulate the rumen bugs to go and chew more of your paddock feed and that. So, there's some very good, once again, it depends exactly where you are. So I don't know where Anonymous is located, but, it's, the country will dictate how much mineral you need to provide. and the animals will show us by, once again, there's some simple steps in providing some supplements that the cows will then tell us, or the animals will tell us, I need that, or no, I'm right. So I hope that answers that question. And thank you to you too, Mac. Thank you.
Okay, I'd say that's probably all our questions coming through. Thank you, Tony, for an informative webinar tonight. And thank you to our breeders also who supplied some photos and data. I hope everyone's been able to get a lot out of tonight's webinar.
Yeah, and thank you everyone, and thank you, Michaela, for assisting and asking. And look, if there's any particular questions, whatever, please touch base with Michaela, and we'll send through. And yeah, I wish you all the best, and hopefully might run into a few years around the track, whether beef this year or not. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Good night, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.